We were just talking to those who just joined us about the awesome funny videos. My favorite are the last two just because they're dorky and fun.
Anyone who did not see them yet, here, I'm going to drop them right now again, so you will have them.
And, make you smile on a sunny day. So for today, guys, we're just wrapping up our parent training series where we're focusing on maintaining continued engagement for growth. So really looking at that, looking towards maintenance strategies and individualizing where you are now and helping you to continue if you're seeing success and problem solve if you're not. Just a quick introduction to me, a reminder of who I am. I'm Dorothy Beerson. I work with Brooks Powers Group, and my role in the district is through the Reengagement Clinic, and I support as a reengagement specialist. And this is my colleague, Steve.
Yeah. I'm Stephen Ottinger. I also work with Brooks Powers Group as a psychologist, and I've been working with Issaquah School District around trauma-informed practices and supports.
Awesome. So for today, we wanted to take just a quick second to talk to parents about data. Your school teams are going to be taking a lot of it, so we wanted to go over that with you guys. Talk a little bit about responding in the moment, because we have requests for that all the time. And then end really with most of our time spent in breakout rooms, or if there's just a small group of us, talking about putting this into practice and answering authentic questions from all those who are here. So let's start with the data conversation. Data really is meant to help us know what and how to talk about what's going on, and then keep us consistent with regards to the practice around it. So Steve and I kind of broke those up into 3 questions, and we thought we'd talk to you a little bit about what that would look like, knowing that your school team is going to have tools and data collection procedures that they're going to be following, but you as parents and team members can have your own lens for data as well. So when we think about what we're seeing, I wanted to speak a little bit to this idea of when we can fall into it, and I've done it myself just in my own practice, where we're thinking about a behavior in terms of always and nevers, right? And we're thinking about, oh my gosh, it happens all the time here, or I always see it all day, or I always see it like this, or it just never happens when this. And always and never can often kind of move us away from the data that helps us really identify what's going on functionally and help us problem solve, because it's really hard to manage behavior when it's just always happening, right? It kind of gives us this vague blanket statement about it. So I wanted to share with everyone this idea instead of flipping our always and never thoughts more to this idea of journal entries, or just understanding and thinking about what are you observing in the moment, right? So I put a little picture here of a great parent tool that I've shared where you're looking at rating your distress and your child's distress in the moment, and you can identify your times. But on this one, we look at morning, afternoon, and evening around a specific behavior. So let's say from my lens, since I always do school engagement, thinking about getting up and going to school in the morning, right? If you're hearing, oh, they're always complaining and they never get up on time, right? Well, let's flip that to doing some journal entries about what their stress level is and what your stress level is in the morning. And let's see how that changes over time. That lends towards a problem solving conversation and can really support your school teams and you too, to have a better understanding of kind of what's going on in the day-to-day. And I've also found that it can make you feel less overwhelming, right? Because you've got kind of a breakdown of what it looks like more routinely. The other piece that can go along really nicely with this, and your school teams will be pretty comfortable with this language, is remembering your ABCs, right? So this is where we think about antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And Lindsay speaks this language really well as our behavior specialist and BCBA, but we want to think about what's happening right before the behavior. When the behavior is happening, what does it look like? And then what follows that, or what's the consequence? And even using like this picture that I gave you with the 3 boxes and putting little notes. Okay, in the morning when I asked him to get up and turned on that alarm, antecedent, they got up and said, oh, rolled over and covered themselves up with a blanket, behavior. And the consequence was I threw my arms up and was like, oh, this is like the 6th day in a row. This is so frustrating, and walked out, right? Antecedent, behavior, consequence. When we break a situation or occurrence into those 3 steps, it can really help us to look at what we can do differently or what strategies and supports your school team can put into place at each of those, at the A, at the B, and at the C. So again, these are just different ways for you guys to start thinking in terms of data about what's going on in the behavior and in the homes to help hopefully decrease a little bit of stress, because I found it makes it a little more measurable instead of feeling like all up in the ether, like, oh, I know my ABCs for Monday, right? And I can look at my journal entry around the stress. So again, these are meant to help us understand what we are seeing and how we are communicating about it, because it allows you to have a language to share with the team.
And along those same lines, so in kind of being able to collect data to understand what's happening, data is also a great tool to support us in making sure that what we're doing is consistent. And so it's a tool that we can use also in our practice as we're putting practices and strategies into place. And so we've talked about before how staying consistent is such an important thing for making effective change. Again, thinking about something like a New Year's resolution, for example. New Year's resolutions fail so often not because they don't feel valuable, but because we often don't commit to the consistency or use tools to help support our consistency and putting the strategies and practices into place. So one quick tool that I often like to start with that can help with consistency is a checklist system. And so, for example, let's say we're trying to make just the overall atmosphere more positive. So that's what we're committing to, right? I'm going to use more positive practices in our day-to-day because we know that when the atmosphere feels more positive, we just tend to see positive effects on regulation and on relationship. So we're going to try this, right? Having a checklist that has 5 to 10 feel good to-dos, and then making sure that each day we're checking at least 3 to 5 of those boxes. That can really help with consistency. It can support our intentionality. And moreover, when we use things like checklist systems, there's also now data that we can now see to be able to assess what are the strategies that we are doing. And we now know we're doing it because we have our data to show that. And then connecting back, as this arrow on the slide here shows, to, and then what are we seeing in terms of the occurrence of those behaviors that we're trying to target, right? And being able to connect those two dots. And so coupling data strategies like that between the where's our data on what we're doing and what is the data on what's happening is so important for that problem solving process. And so we very much encourage you to think about data in those two ways as something that can help support really effective strategies. Okay, so we talked a little bit now about how to use data to understand behavior better and get a better idea of how to talk about the behavior. We also touched on now how to use data to support implementing our strategies, using them consistently and making sure that we're using some intentionality around the strategies that we're choosing and that we're doing them the way that we think we're supposed to be doing them. So now let's talk a little bit more about specific strategies. So in particular for responding in the moment when things can feel the most challenging. One tool that I find really helpful when we are in the midst of dysregulation, or when our kiddo is in the midst of dysregulation more specifically, is having a frame that can help us organize how we're going to respond. And using a frame like this can help with two things. So first, we're making sure that we're being responsive to needs and establishing consistency and predictability for our kiddos. So this helps us know that we're doing what we can in the moment. And second, using the same approach establishes a really reliable and consistent pattern that our kiddos can then expect and over time engage with. Because if they know what to expect, it gives them the opportunity of knowing how they want to be able to engage with it. And it creates a safer experience for them because they know what's going to happen each time. I do want to say this can take time, and that's okay. Whenever we establish a new routine, a new pattern, it takes time. But know that with every repetition that you have of following a framework like this, you're building the neural pathways, both for yourself in your practice of getting better at using these kinds of strategies, and for your kiddos and expecting to hear them and how to respond in a way that will be effective for them in that moment. And so what are some key components of a framework like this? So when our kids become really dysregulated, there are 4 main components that you can use. The first is orienting and reflecting. And this really is just stating what you see or what you hear, okay? I like to think about it as being a sports announcer, right? If you were just to report exactly what you're seeing, no judgment, nothing like that, you're not taking sides, but just reporting back, that's how you know that you are reflecting the situation. From there, adding in validation. So this is really just acknowledging emotions. It does not mean you have to agree with the emotions, just that you are acknowledging the emotions that your kiddo is having. Because whether the reason is something that is appropriate or correct in the moment, that really doesn't matter in the moment. What matters in the moment is recognition of what your kiddo is experiencing. The unpacking of the emotional experience and things like that, that's something that can happen later after the dysregulation has been diffused. The third piece is supporting coping. And in particular, it's really helpful to either have some skills and knowing what skills or tools that your kiddo has available to them when they're in a place like this, right? Do they know grounding tools, right? Do they know I have this one mantra that I'll just repeat it? Do they have deep breathing that they can use? Are there other coping things that help, right? Does sitting in a quiet and darkened room, does that help them calm? Knowing what those tools are can be really helpful. But I also want to encourage not to fix the problem that is causing the dysregulation, but instead support your kiddo in using skills to try and help bring that dysregulation down. The problem with fixing is that we want to fix it, right? We don't want to see our kids uncomfortable, but in that moment, the messaging of fixing is potentially going to tell them that you don't think that they're able to do it themselves. So I just caution against try not to do the fixing piece, even though it is so hard to avoid because you really want to see your kiddo not be suffering. The final piece is restating expectations and giving space. And so I would really just say referring to the household expectations, or if they're in the middle of an activity and that's what's contributing to the dysregulation, just reminding of what those expectations are in a really caring and warm way, and including choice, giving them an option for how they want to get at that expectation, and then giving space and time for them to make a decision. Okay, so that's the general frame. What does this actually sound like in practice? Let's look at an example script. Okay, so this is just an example script. I want to be really clear on that. Okay, so this is, as I put at the top, it's really a guide more than anything else, and to give you a sense of what it could look like or sound like. But the most important part with this is once you get comfortable with the components, having it as genuine as possible. So when we're thinking about a situation like this, what it might sound like is you orient to the situation first. You are pushing things off your desk right now. That tells me something might be upsetting or hard for you right now, and you might need a regulating break. Let's take a break for a minute. Move into validating and reassuring. It's okay that this is hard for you right now. We are safe. We're all okay right now. Everything is okay. Moving into asking about the coping strategy. What do you think you can do right now that will help you feel calm? Oftentimes, you'll get a I don't know, or a response that is not helping towards that using a strategy for being calm, particularly as you're first starting to support your kiddo with this kind of approach. And if you get that, that's okay. You can say, I can see that your body is really stiff right now. And so I wonder what can you do now so that you're able to sit calmly with your body more loose, right? Give them some feedback on what are the things that are telling you they're still at a escalated space, right? And then once you kind of have established something, and that might be, I sometimes in these situations, I will take a deep breath or I'll sit and I'll take a break for a little bit. Give them those options. Once they have chosen something, or at least are in a place where they're sitting calmly, you can say, okay, I'm going to check back in 3 minutes, in 5 minutes, whatever you find works best for your kiddo. And then once you see that they're ready, go back. You can also add, if you're ready before I come back, you can just give me a little wave and I'll come back over and check on you. And that's how I'll know that you are calmed down, you're ready to go. And when you come back, I see that you're calm. It looks like you're ready to come back. Nice job. And on the walk over, use that as an opportunity to connect. And this is the place where you can summarize for them what just happened. So you can really reinforce for them that they calm themselves down. All right. And this is really a core piece, right? So, I get it. it was really frustrating and you were having a hard time with it. And so it was a great time for practicing a coping strategy. You used whatever coping strategy they used, and now you're calm. That's awesome. Nice job. So where you left off in what we were doing was wherever it was, right? So when we get back, here's what we can do. And just have that as a conversation. Or even say, where do you want to pick up, right? Give them that choice. And then just continue with that to create that opportunity for a positive. So this is one sample script, okay? So I definitely encourage you to kind of think about how this works for you, make it fit with the way that you like to interact with your kiddo, and definitely feel free to take this and play with it, right? As long as you're keeping those core pieces. And I know a couple of the core pieces are broken down to a couple steps in this one, but just to give you an example of what that might sound like. One last note I do want to make before we move on is you'll notice in step 2, I use the word safe. And there's some good research to show that if this word does not have any kind of triggering meaning for your kiddo, it's a really helpful strategy to have that word embedded, particularly when we're thinking about trauma-informed supports. And so if we know that stress and an experience of I can't do this, I'm not okay right now, is an experience that your kiddo experiences, using the word safe can be really supportive. With that said, it's not necessary. And if you find that that often increases dysregulation, you are welcome to use a different word or a different way of saying that. But I just wanted to note that because it can be a challenging word for some kids.
All right, so building on Stephen's lens here of sort of responding in the moment, I wanted to give some other strategies that can be really helpful in regards to your interactions with your kiddos to help promote engagement, right? And help promote that kind of ongoing calm and emotion regulation that we're shooting for with our students. The first, just with regards to understanding and supporting, I can break it down in kind of 3 different strategies. We've got cognitive restructuring, which is kind of just a fancy way of helping them have helpful thoughts, right? We also have psychoeducation, again, another fancy way of understanding what's going on for them in their body and their mind. And then we have somatic control exercises, the third fancy way of saying managing what's going on in your body, right? And what you're feeling, the symptoms that can kind of come up with all of that. And each of these tools can be used in pretty much any situation where we've got an emotion or a symptom of either trauma or school refusal that we want to support students through. They're really general strategies. Cognitive restructuring, or helping our thoughts be more helpful, so switching from unhelpful to helpful thoughts, deals with first identifying what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're doing. So I've got a triangle there with a thought bubble and a heart, and then a pyramid for the behavior. And this is a great way just to have a conversation with your kid about what's going on. And you can change it based on the developmental level of the kiddo, but just be like, hey, when such and such happened, what's going on in your mind? What did the voice in your head say, right? And what were you feeling? Give me a feeling word, right? And then what was your body doing? And again, you can adjust that for whatever level, but that gives us context. And then you can say, sounds like those thoughts, man, they were just not helping you out in that situation, right? They were just going on and on about how frustrated you were or how unfair it was, or that you're never going to be able to do that. Let's think of maybe what we could think differently next time, and give them some different strategies for next time. It gives you a framework to communicate and to talk about, and also to restructure for next time. When we start thinking about psychoeducation, a really fun story that I love to use with kiddos to understand what's going on in their brain and their bodies, and this is just one story, is talking about saber-toothed tigers, in the sense that developmentally or biologically, our bodies were trained to stay away and not get eaten from saber-toothed tigers. So when a certain event would happen and there was a tiger involved, we'd have a direct association. If anything like that were to occur again, our brain would flip and respond like saber-toothed tiger, must save, so that we could run and get away from it. Nowadays, though, there aren't any saber-toothed tigers eating us, but our students and children can respond, our brain can respond in the same way to a piece of homework, right? Or to going to school, or to a negative interaction with a peer, right? and the same bodily functions or reactions that occurred, like increased acid production, tensing in muscles, increased heart rate, dilation of pupils, all these same things happen, and our body feels just overwhelmed, just as it would if we were running from a saber-toothed tiger. So helping them to understand that that's natural and normal, and that what we want to do is move to somatic control exercises or strategies that help us manage those responses, because this is what our body does. It's what it's trained to do to prevent us from getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, right? But do you see a saber-toothed tiger? No, I do not either. So what is your saber-toothed tiger right now, right? It seems like when we did our triangle, it was when you were given that piece of homework, right? Or when I asked you to get up and go to school, or whatever you put in there. And then, like Steve was saying, moving to some of those coping strategies, that can look like somatic control exercises. And here I've got some awesome apps and then a phenomenal book for the little ones. And then there's so many more, but we're looking at strategies that help us manage really fast breathing, really rapid heart rate, tense muscles, hyper focus. So activities that help us change our lens to think about different things, basic things like taking a bubble bath, reading an enjoyable book, watching a funny meme or video. These are all activities that can really help with your symptoms or response that's going on in your body and bring you back to baseline. So again, just some understanding and supporting strategies. And then on the other side, we've got some contingency management pieces. So when we're responding in the moment, we also want to have some setups that reward our kiddos when they do well, and then have some consequences when they engage in a behavior we don't want to see. So I've got some steps here that help outline that when we're looking at putting those things in place in the home. And really, we want to start with a manageable goal. We want to make sure we're talking through any potential barriers that come up around these steps, and then have a plan for reviewing progress. And this is something that you can totally collaborate with your school teams around too, because they're experts in this. When we start to think about creating that whole plan, we want to set clear expectations. We want to outline the reward for completing the expectation. We want to review the consequence if the expectation is not completed. And then we want to state the plan for questions and changes around that. And I make this sound like it's a super simple, like 3 sentences explanation to kids. It can be a little more complex than that. But the big idea here is making sure that you have those 4 parts. And then you're working together with your kiddo and your school team to understand how that changes based on the behavioral change. But when you have these strategies in place, like the response that Steve gave you, and then knowing how to kind of talk through what's going on in the brain and in the body, and then giving them some strategies for responding to that, as well as putting boundaries in when it's done well and when there's consequences, we can see continual progress and maintaining engagement. So with that, again, we just wanted to keep our PowerPoints shorter today. Stephen and I wanted to go ahead and do some breakout rooms, but given that there's really only like 3-5 people here today, I'm voting. I don't know what Steve, you think. Maybe we just stay as one big group. That sound good to everybody?
I would still say take a look on this slide for the topics that we were thinking for the breakout room, as that might guide some of the questions you might have.
Yeah, so what we've got as far as topics, we wanted to give people opportunities to talk about managing and understanding anxiety specifically, give us some specific examples and kind of talk through those as a group. We wanted to talk a little about supporting engagement in the home in the virtual and hybrid setting, knowing that all of that is changing. We want to talk a little bit about teaming with the school in case you wanted any tips or tricks or advice there. And then we also wanted to give you guys opportunities to talk about building motivation for engagement. Again, just suggestions, but we want to be responsive to what you guys are coming to us today with. So I think maybe with that in mind, was there anything, maybe one of those that anyone wanted to jump in and ask questions about or start with? Or Steve, did you have something you want to?
Say, before we do that, I know this is also the part where we will typically end the recording. So I was wondering, could we jump ahead one slide first before we do that?
Sure. Go ahead and just do the big takeaways.
Yeah, exactly. And so just, we had a much shorter set of things that we touched on today than we have on past trainings, but just in thinking about the big takeaways that we were hoping to share with you today, we really wanted to make sure we focused in on the fact that it is okay to not have all the answers. What is really important is that we have plans that we know are based on frameworks and strategies that are going to be effective and are shown to be effective, and then plan to stick with them. We also want to note that we can and should use intentional approaches to help us make sure that connection comes before redirection. And so always know that if you are working on connection and focusing on that first, you're in the right place. And then the last piece was just touching on what Dorothy had noted a number of times, but collaboration is such an important tool to help us focus our work to be as effective as possible. So definitely, we very much encourage teaming with your school team and collaborating and building plans so that your kiddo can get the same supports across settings. With that said, I think maybe we can stop the recording and we can just move into Q&A.